right, well, welcome again, everyone, to this second installment of the Boardroom webinar series. I'm Bonnie McEwen with the State Library, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague and friend, Cindy Davis, Director at the Spirit Lake Public Library.
Hello.
Well, this, as I said, is the second installment in the Boardroom webinar series. We're actually reprising this series. It was first presented last year, but because it was so ambitious, we didn't want it to be just a one-time opportunity, so we're bringing it back around in 2018 with a few modest changes. This year, most of the programs land on Tuesday evenings. I took out a couple of topics from last year and inserted 2 new ones, and this time in 2018, the series runs from February. We started last month. It runs from February through October. At the end of each evening, you'll see a preview of the topic that's planned for next time, but you can also see several of them at a glance in our CE catalog. Most of you found that CE catalog and enabled you to register for the program tonight. So that's our intention. We encourage you to tell your friends, tell your pals, and join us again for future episodes. So with each of these Boardroom webinars, we're likely to have different people joining us each time, so I include this slide showing 2 publications from the State Library. On the left, the Trustees Handbook came out in 2014, and on the right is the newest edition of Iowa Public Library Standards that was revised in July of 2016. These are very important publications for your reference. They are both available in their entirety on the State Library's website. There at the bottom of the slide, you can see the address that takes you right there. And we will be referring to both of these books throughout this series, and in fact, through many of the training that the State Library provides, we like to include some mention of standards because there is always, typically, a connection to the topics we offer in continuing education and the standards that support those topics. This is where we're headed tonight, toward better board recruitment. Cindy and I want to talk with you about a sales pitch. And if you have one, maybe there are some tips you can take away from tonight that can improve upon your sales pitch. Maybe not unlike an elevator speech where you talk with prospective trustees who maybe have expressed interest in joining the library board, or people you think would make very good board members when there are vacancies to be filled. We want to talk about board responsibilities and the expectations of library board members. That really needs to be very well communicated to people who express interest. We'll have some notions about where to find people if they're not beating a path to your door asking to be on the library board. Where might you seek out some people in your community from various groups and organizations? And then we have some other tips that you can apply toward your recruitment practices, everything from bringing a calendar to your board meetings, a business calendar, to maybe the idea of developing an online application form for people who would be interested in serving on the board. They may very well find that on your library's website. So we'll get to all of that. And we're going to be very anxious to have you join us in conversation. Although we haven't turned on the microphones for you to speak to us, we hope that you will use the chat space to let us know and join in with your observations, your perspectives. So before recruitment can really be done in earnest, it does take a sales pitch of sorts. Before it can really start in earnest, I think library directors and staff, and certainly the trustees who are already on the board, need a really solid understanding of the roles and responsibilities that are going to be asked of library trustees. And that's the first step. Then the second step really is to be able to communicate those responsibilities and expectations to prospective trustees. And I think communicating is a very key part of this, being very upfront and very honest about those expectations. Because I think, truly in my experience, I think too often the job of library trustee is undersold. It's kind of a soft sell approach, right? I mean, have you ever found yourself coaxing people to fill a board vacancy by saying, oh, there's nothing to it. Very little to do. We only meet once a month for about an hour. It's really easy. I think we can all identify with this. I know I certainly can. In previous jobs, I've been the one scouting for new trustees, and it's not an easy thing to do. So I can appreciate the tendency to want to do a little soft shoe there. But here's the downside for me of underselling the job. If we undersell the job of a library trustee, then along comes the state library, talking about standards for public libraries, standards for boards, like the expectation for ongoing board expectation. Wait, what? I'm going to have to do what? I'm going to have to go to school? Along with the Iowa Library Association. Here comes the Iowa Library Association urging boards to stand up for intellectual freedom, urging boards to contact your local legislators to lobby for increased funding for libraries at the local, state, and national level. And then along come city officials who too often dismiss the public library as an essential city service. So now, all of a sudden, with all of those players in the mix, all of a sudden now this job of library trustee isn't quite so easy. So I bring forward this quote because I really do like this. From Helen Keller, alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. I've also really come to love the phrase collective impact. That's a phrase that comes from Libraries Transform, which is an initiative from the Public Library Association, and it probably is floating in many other business circles as well. And Helen Keller didn't use those exact words, but I like to think that that was perhaps her meaning behind this quote. We can have a greater impact on outcomes by coming together in our efforts. And to me, this also speaks to volunteerism. When I think about the library board, and I hear this said so often in my travels around my own counties in Northwest Iowa. I travel 14 counties primarily as the consultant for Northwest Iowa. And on occasion, farther afield across the state, I hear so often at the state library that, be careful, state library. We are volunteers after all. We library board members. Don't push us too hard, too far, too fast. we are volunteers. Remember that. And we do know that, and we acknowledge that. And it is an impressive volunteer commitment to serve on the library board. I see it, though, in a slightly different way. I see the library board as a more elevated volunteer commitment because library trusteeships come with a very unique set of expectations that are likely not asked of you in your other volunteer activities, likely. In your board service, you are hiring the director of the library. You are overseeing the library's budget. So you're overseeing the spending of public tax dollars. You're actually developing public policy, and you're helping to draft strategic planning for a city's service. And we really need you to be those community advocates throughout the community, advocating for library advancements. So it really is quite unique what is asked of library trustees when they join the library board. And I think that's just another important reason to underscore that those expectations really do need to be fairly communicated to people who express interest. Um, so I would just leave you with that thought as you look at your experience on the board and kind of compare it with your other volunteer effort. So I mentioned early on that for your recruitment messaging to become maybe a bit more effective or really more full-throated as you are having conversations with people who you think would make good trustees, you need to have really a solid understanding of just what those library trustee expectations are. Where can you find some of those board member responsibilities? And Cindy, I'm gonna send things to you to talk about these great expectations of library trustees and the sources where we can draw from.
Okay, so Great Expectations is a very good name for it, because you guys really make a difference for your library and for your town. And the best resources are the Library Trustees Handbook, and there was a link to that in one of the beginning slides. You can find it on the State Library's website, and it's awesome. It basically has everything you need in there. You have the standards, which are also coming from the State Library, and there's standards that you use for accreditation. So those are things that you need to take into account when you do all of your planning. And both of those books, both of those are online and can be printed out if you would like to. I usually give new board members copies, but also make sure they know where to find those things. Your library ordinance is something from your own city. It should be in your documentation from when your library was developed. For us, it's kind of in the same place as our policies and stuff, but it's something you need to be aware of. So dig that out if you are not sure. And every city should have a library ordinance. Your bylaws are going to go along with that. So you should have the policy folders, the bylaws, the ordinance. That all is it's an important part of your records, and you need to be using it with your planning and stuff. And so some of that, like the first two things, come from the state library. The ordinance, the bylaws come from your own library. You have the board evaluations and checklists, and those are things, I think, Bonnie, that we get from the state library. There's some other resources, maybe ILA, like the Iowa Library Association, or the ALA might have some more resources like that. And then you have the Iowa Code and gender balance, and they're just policies on what they expect you to take into account when you're looking for members for your library board. You need to aim for gender equity, so you have, as you know, men and women on your board. At our library, we try and have kind of a balance of older and younger and different. We like to get school teachers, but you don't want everyone on your board to be a school teacher. You want some balance, and you want a variety of people and perspectives, I think.
Cindy, I would, before we go on, I wonder if we should, or if we need to, make a distinction between recruitment, which is really our focus tonight, and board orientation. This is a lot of documentation, a lot of sources where you can find all of those great expectations of library boards, right? But I see recruitment and board orientation as two pretty different things. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree with that, yes. And the orientation for me is the first step in, like, the continuing ed standard that the state library just put in place for library boards. So recruitment is getting them interested, getting them to come to apply, the people you're looking at. And then I think the next step is orientation, as far as, okay, now you're here and this is what we want you to think about or look at, and these are your resources.
Right. So even though we're sharing with you all of these good sources where you can learn more about library board responsibilities and expectations, it's not like we're suggesting that you throw all of this stuff out at a new person who across the circ desk who expresses interest in being on the board, or somebody who speaks to you at a grocery store. But where these sources I think can come in handy is for you to kind of incorporate them into your conversations and be able to say with a real honesty about what the job entails, these are the things that you'll be dealing with when you join us on the library board. We really deal with some very important issues for library advancements and for library service for our community. And these sources just give you some of those talking points, if you will, to be able to share with people in your recruitment or your sales pitch.
Yeah, and I think the handbook and the standards, those are at least 40-page documents. I think the handbook is for sure, and the standards is a pretty good size folder too. And that it could be very overwhelming. When I'm talking to people about joining my board, they like having the guidelines where I can say we have a handbook from the state library that tells you what library boards do, and these are the standards that you're looking at. And I always remind them, there's 6 other people on the board. You're not alone, and you don't have to, but yes, they're good reference points, but they would be overwhelming on recruitment. So you have the library trustees handbook. And if you remember the phrase administrative authority, it essentially means that there's 5 areas for board responsibility. And it's governance of the library. So this list comes out of the trustees handbook, and it's to help with recruitment and orientation. Newly appointed trustees a lot of times don't know how important the job is for governing a library. Standard number 12 calls for the library director to ensure an orientation program for new board members, and that's very important because it is overwhelming. So the expectations there, the board is responsible for hiring and evaluating the library director and developing the policies for the library, overseeing the budget, planning for the future, and advocating throughout the community. So that's a big list. That's an important list that you're doing for your library. It's huge, actually.
Well, I agree with what you said a little bit ago about serving up this book, maybe not in its entirety, but maybe the table of contents to put in a packet in an orientation packet for people once they have joined the board, or maybe just providing a link on a brochure. We're going to show you a recruitment brochure a little later this evening, and maybe you could include links to your library's website, links to the state library's website on a recruitment brochure that provides people with access to more information if they really are seriously considering joining the library board. But I agree with you when you said don't just give this wholesale to people who have not yet joined the board. It would be pretty overwhelming, but certainly be able to direct them to it, I think, is a good idea.
And again, it's a great guideline, and it's something that my board uses. So your public library trustees are your citizen advocates, and I know in our community, the library board and the Friends board both feel that that's a very important role that they take in our community. So advocacy is a primary role because you have you're responsible for your library's governance. You are expected to improve its services or keep the services at a high level, and you serve as a connection between the local community and the public library. So that's a very unique position to promote the library, and it's also something where you need to look at the needs of your community. And when we talked before about recruitment and who you're looking for, it's nice to have links with other groups. Some of the things that you would do with the advocacy or ways that you would use it and get involved in it, you have planning projects that bring in community opinion. What does your community want? Backing the library's budget requests. are your staff salaries at an equal level as other city workers? It's something you can go in and talk to your city council about. Capital improvements, your budget. If your budget is, you have to justify certain areas. So all those things you want to look at, and you need to be part of that and be willing to go in and talk to the city council, I think. Advocating for advancements in technology. Are there needs in your community? Are you in a small town where the library might be the only source of Wi-Fi? Those are things that you have to take into account. And just upholding foundational principles, patron confidentiality, non-labeling, intellectual freedom. A lot of those issues are really out there right now, and they're things that you need to be looking at and be responsible for. And I think, Bonnie, you have one of your webinars is on advocacy, right? Board roles?
Yeah, yes. One of the boardroom series, I think it's going to be the August installment where we talk about advocacy in more detail, and that will be Zach Smith from Cherokee joining me for that one.
And I think the advocacy is important, and that's one of the things that you can do, like for your CE training within your, like at your board meetings and stuff, is talk about it. I know I hear people come into the library and talk about, well, one of your friends members said this, or one of your board members said this. So they are listening to you when you're out in the community and talking about things, especially needs. I think they're very receptive to that. Okay, and here we have something for Forsyth County, and it's North Carolina, and this is a message from the library board chairman, or chairwoman, I guess. And it's just a very cool article talking about what you need the library for, what's going on at the library. It's something that would be awesome to have on your library's webpage when you have that section on the library board. And it's a welcome message, very high on that advocacy scale. This is a great way to get the word out on how important the library is. It'd be great to have in your planning documents. It'd be a great discussion piece. Other board members could use this and say, hey, look on our website, look at the library board chair's message. It's just a great jumping off point, I think.
I just really liked that. I discovered that by accident one day and looking for something else, but I thought to myself, what a great, not only advocacy piece, but what a great recruitment piece to find that on a library's website and encourage people who see it there as well to think about the public library as their next volunteer opportunity. I like that a lot. So if you like this idea as well, maybe this could be your first takeaway moment from the webinar tonight, is to splash a welcome message up there, courtesy of your library board president. I like showing photos as well. I know that a lot of our Iowa libraries, on their websites, they will list the names of the library board members, which is great. I like the photos as well. I think that's very cool, unless you guys are photo shy. There's a library board, I think it's Lawrence, Kansas, library board, where they have this gallery of photos of all the board members displayed on that section of the library's website.
And I think when if you do the PLOW website, I think one on that, the basic template, I think, has something for library board members. So.
Yes, and a listing of trustees' names, that's a good start. You could always add to that with just a couple of paragraphs about what the library board does. It kind of, heads you down that path of maybe a more robust kind of recruitment message you can get out there.
And I think the slide that you had before, Bonnie, and it was one of the ones I talked about that just gave the basic governance things, overseeing the budget, hiring and evaluating the director, even that would be a great thing to put on.
Yes, I agree. Storm Lake Library has done just that. Storm Lake Library kind of lifted the text of those primary duties of the library board. They lifted the text right out of the trustees handbook, and they put that up on the page that that promotes the library board on their website. So that's totally doable, pretty easy to do, and it just kind of gives even a bigger picture, really, of the work that the board is engaged in. So many of you who are chatting in are saying that you're all over it with listing their names, so that's wonderful. So maybe the next step is a few paragraphs about what they do on behalf of the library. It's a nice way also. I think it's recruitment, it's advocacy, but it's also a nice way to give credit to the people who do spend their time in that kind of commitment to the library.
Our library board is
Great.
also, I think, posted in City Hall, in the meeting rooms, City Council chambers.
The names of them?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. They should be there too. Because mayors and councils make those appointments. So great to have some kind of a documentation there too. Well, Cindy mentioned standards as one of the sources to find some of those library trustee expectations, and this is another very fine place to look. The trustees handbook, of course, from cover to cover, the trustees handbook talks about library board expectations, but actually so do public library standards. In fact, the whole first chapter of our new standards that were revised in 2016 speaks to the task of the library board. These same resources, as we mentioned, these same resources, the trustees handbook, the standards document, the other pieces that we'll show you in a little bit, all of these sources really help pave the way from recruitment toward new board member orientation, and later, as Cindy said, toward board education. Any of these things that we're touching on tonight would make just very good ongoing board education topics. A good many standards speak to library boards. The fact that you need to have 4 written policies. The Boardroom episode coming up in May is the one called Policies for Results. Standard 17, always a popular one, calling for the library board to be engaged in strategic planning. That's the webinar topic that's coming up in June. So the Boardroom series is taking a lot of these primary responsibilities of library boards and flipping them into some of our Boardroom webinars. There's a method to our madness. So from policy development to budget oversight to hiring and evaluating the library director to strategic planning. These are pretty big deal things to be doing, and I have to confess that this is my favorite standard. Good old standard number 8 in the 2016 edition took this board education standard from a tier 3 requirement down to a tier 1. So I know you're familiar with standards. Libraries meet standards in different areas of achievement, different levels of achievement. So at a tier 1 level, that's the most basic level of achievement. There are like 29 standards required in tier 1. Board education has always been a standard for the state library's standards program, but up until 2016, we didn't require it until a tier 3 level, which is the highest achievement level. We brought that down all the way down to a tier 1 level. So granted, it impacted hundreds of more libraries in Iowa. You can thank me now or you can thank me later, or us, I should say. It wasn't just me, although this is my favorite standard. This probably explains why you're all here tonight and why we will have such a good attendance, I hope, at these Boardroom installments coming up, because board education is now looked at as a very fundamental, very basic aspect of your trusteeship. Our session number 1 which we did just last month in February. We started the Boardroom series with a topic called Creating a Culture of Learning for the Library Board. And that's where we started the series this year, thanks to this standard having moved its impact and affecting a lot more libraries in Iowa. Creating a culture of learning for the library board, we led off with that because of this standard. So if you didn't catch that webinar series, I can send you a link to the recording for that one. This is really an essential. And I think this also underscores a really important part of the recruitment messaging. This training expectation really can't come as a surprise to people. It's just not fair if this isn't just put out there and very honestly and very upfront manner talked about in your conversations, or talked about at the point of maybe you're handing someone a flyer or a brochure if they express interest in serving on the library board. And I have a recruitment brochure that I will share with you a little bit later tonight, so stay tuned for that. But I just think that we need to really be very upfront with, in our recruitment messaging, that board education is a very practical, a very logical part of what they'll be doing. So it's not looked at as burdensome. Glenda and I talked about that last month. This can't be looked at as burdensome. It needs to be looked at as an opportunity for lifelong learning, and certainly as a great way for library trustees to ensure that their library continues to meet standards at that fundamental Tier 1 level.
And Bonnie, I think it's important that they know that that you usually do it in a group. I mean, you can do it on your own, and that's awesome, but you can do it with the whole group. And mine have enjoyed what we've done for the continuing ed. I've had very good feedback from it, so I think it's been a positive thing.
Great. And Cindy, coming from Spirit Lake Library, that's in Dickinson County, and Dickinson County has just done wonderful collaborative projects, one of them being county-wide board education programs. And I think that's a great way to crack through that standard. Dickinson County does it. They choose an evening. Dickinson County boards come together for a county-wide board program in an evening. Calhoun County has done it. BV County has. Sioux County is doing the same in April. So this idea is catching on. And if you're doing that in your part of the state, in your county, please let us know that in chat. And we will acknowledge that there are lots of libraries that are grabbing a hold of that idea.
And we usually do it. We have had a meal with ours. We've invited Bonnie to come and talk to us, for the continuing ed part. But we've done the meal as an appreciation for people serving on the library board, and they've gotten to visit with all the other board members from the county, and mine have really enjoyed that. They feel like it's one of our most positive things.
And it's a very friendly, congenial thing to do. Online learning can be kind of a solitary pursuit. So when library boards can come together to listen to a webinar like this together, that's maybe an easier, people are more receptive perhaps to that than just listening to an individual webinar at home. I mean, there's certainly the convenience factor of doing that, but the gathering together is what I think makes for those good conversations and that good networking with other trustees from nearby towns. So here's another source for board expectations, and that's your library ordinance. I think Cindy referenced this already. This is local law. You know that the town established a public library. Your town established a public library back in 1909 or whenever that happened for you. And this is the local law that governs the powers and duties of the library board. It spells out the number of members you have on your board. State law allows for either 5, 7, or 9 members. It should spell out the mix of city versus county representation on your board. This is a good thing to keep in mind also at the point of recruitment. The reason we put this in the mix tonight, and you'll probably see it show up again in other boardroom sessions. We put it in tonight because it's a good recruitment piece. If you have vacancies to be filled on your library board and you feel like you need more county, rural county representation, you need to first look to your ordinance to see if you can change the mix of what's already specified for the number of city versus the number of rural people in your county. Look to that ordinance because that's the legal document that has established the composition of your library board. So if your local ordinance says that your board is to be appointed by all city residents, but you want to, in the next vacancy, appoint a couple of county people, you can't do that just by council action. That requires a public vote. There are several things about the library board that requires a public vote, and that's one of them, to change that composition, the number of members, increase or decrease, or the mix of city versus rural people. It can certainly be changed, but it just has to be done by a citywide vote. So if you question any of those things, just contact us at the State Library. We're happy to step you through it. But it's a nice piece to keep in mind as you're looking toward these recruitment challenges and if you have vacancies to be filled.
And this is from the Trustees Handbook, and it's Library Board Expectations. And there are 3 evaluations that library boards can use to gauge how the board comes together to conduct their business. So there's 2 assessments, and they go together. They're companion pieces. For individual trustees, what they bring to the table. And this one is, and it says library board assessment done individually and discussed as a board. And for the board as a whole, to assess how the library board works together collectively and collaboratively. And there's another one called toward tech-savvy trustees. So the first line on this board as a group worksheet says the board has a method in place for the recruitment and recommendation of trustees for open positions. And so again, this is a recruitment tool. It also talks on number 2 about new board member orientation, board member training. And this one is from the Iowa Code. And this is the one that we talked about earlier where it talks about gender balance. So all appointed boards, commissions, committees, councils, if not otherwise provided by law, shall be gender balanced. That's been in effect now for 6 years. And the obligation towards that it rests with city and county governments. Library boards can help with this by developing a list of trustees when you have vacancies that come up, and that list can and probably should include both men and women. The law says that gender balance has to be a good faith effort, so you need to try for it. It's not always going to work out perfectly. And yeah, the library board can just help with the effort and work on that.
So now talk about this, if you would. What attributes do you think are important to look for in prospective trustees? We've talked about those great expectations, right? What the job entails in terms of the board's legal authority, the standards to be met, their primary responsibilities, board education. But these are really this is really asking more about characteristics or attributes.
And someone here I see just put down availability, and that's one that we really have to work on. When you look at your balance on your board, we have some people that are retired, and if they're going to go south all winter, that doesn't work so well for having to attend board meetings.
Mm-hmm. Availability, I think is a good one. And again, I think I led off the discussion with the idea that, when we tend to undersell the job of a library trustee, we tend to discount time factor. Not that we're not that it's horrendous. It's not like a full-time job. It's not like a 40-hour week thing. We hope. We hope for you guys. Maybe it just feels that way. Um, but we do tend to kind of underplay or downplay the time, saying that it's just an hour a month, it's no big deal. There are times when a board has to convene, maybe an extra meeting in a month. There are times when maybe the meetings go longer than an hour. There are times, if you're engaged, especially in planning for results, when those are some extra meetings. Maybe you have to, or you're asked to join the budget presentation to city council or county supervisors. There are times when it's not just an easy in and out hour. So that availability, I agree with you, is really an important thing to convey up front. Look at some of these other answers, though. Those were all great answers. Here's one more. I don't know if this showed up in the list, but it's one that I've come to appreciate finding in library board members. We, of course, look for this attribute in the library staff that we hire, and directors and support staff and all positions. We're looking for some tech savviness, but what a bonus when we can find tech savvy trustees. I've been a long time believer in the notion that the more tech savvy trustees are in their personal lives or professional lives, then the better advocates they will be for the library's technology needs. They'll have a familiarity with technology, with software, with social media. And granted, tech savviness isn't specifically listed anywhere. It's one of those checklists that Cindy referenced in the trustee's handbook, but you don't find this talked much about in board education circles, which is why this has become my new thing. It really does speak to attributes. It speaks to attitudes and new skill sets that would be nice to have when you know you have vacancies to be filled. Actually, because this is a favorite topic of mine.
Take a look at this one. Who's out there? Likely library stakeholders. And a stakeholder, of course, is anyone who has a stake or an interest in your library, in your community also. And look at who the likely people are. Who are the stakeholders? Depending on the size of your town, you're going to have some people representing different community groups and organizations. If you take a look at this, and this list goes along with your list of volunteer activities from earlier on. So if you've been through planning for results, you're going to have a list like this that was required by planning for results, and they develop a list of stakeholders. And this is something that we did in graduate school on library science. Look at the stakeholders. And these are people that would likely have a vested interest in the library's success. Again, look for your balance of gender and age. Look at some of the groups here. And when you're doing it, if you're looking at it within your group, just think how many of you are on more than one of these. So you have your business, your Chamber of Commerce, your economic development group in your city. You have service organizations. You have the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis, AARP. There's dozens of community groups. Cultural groups. You have school groups. You have your faculty. You have school librarians. You have ethnic organizations. You have family services. And depending on the size of your town, there can be a lot of different family service organizations. You have financial representatives. You have your healthcare organizations, nursing homes, hospitals, all of those. Legal services. You have the media, you have organizations serving the disabled, professional groups, senior centers. All of these are going to come into play. They're all groups that you're serving or using. Think back to what you had said before. How many of you, in chat, How many of you can say that you cover a couple of these on your library board? You're going to have that overlap. In Cherokee, at Cherokee Public Library, at their board meeting last year, they have a young man who looks to be about 16. He grew up in Cherokee, went away to college, came back, and works there. And he inquired at City Hall about the possibility of serving on any city board or commission. And when a library board vacancy came up, that was just the perfect fit. So you have a civic-minded young person. You never know where the interest is going to be in serving for the library board, and community needs to know that it's an option, where I think a lot of people maybe don't know that that's available, but that's a cool story. Anything else on that one, Bonnie?
No, I think that's great. And that's what library boards strive to be, or any city board or commission, to be very broad-based and representative of different aspects of the community. And what I like about that story about the young man at Cherokee Library is to not just kind of set your sights on those folks who are retired, enjoying retirement, but to look for that age balance as well, I think can be very beneficial for the library. Well, Cindy and I have a few more recruitment tips to share with you. These are not so much people-based as they are just strategy-based. These are some recruitment tips that hopefully will help bolster your recruitment efforts. And here is that famous recruitment flyer that I was hinting at earlier this evening. Voila, here it is. This is an infographic that I designed using Canva software. And if you like it, let me know, because I can probably figure out how to share this with you. How important would it be not just to have a recruitment flyer or a brochure to be able to distribute to people who express interest in serving on the board, but to include this 5th paragraph, a commitment to continuing education. This puts it right out there, doesn't it? It takes away the surprise. It takes away the big gulp that people might feel when come to find out a year into their board service, and now they have to do what? They have to take a class? Excuse me? This is in the fine print. Nobody told me I had to do this. Nobody told me I had to go back to school. Let's put it right up front and ask for a commitment to lifelong learning. You expressed that just a little bit ago in the opinion poll. So this is probably kind of small print, so I'll just read this paragraph. It says, ongoing board education is an expectation. Our participation in continuing education is a needed and logical commitment. Are we lifelong learners on this library board? You bet your life. So this is a brochure that I designed to be an infographic. Let me know if you like it. Tell me send me an email, would you?
All right, Bonnie, okay.
So there you go. This is a recruitment piece, and it's certainly not the only way to develop a brochure, and Canva software, not the only software in town either, to help you do this. You could do this in PowerPoint or Word or Publisher or any cool software to give you a glitzy brochure that you could have available to give to people. All right. Here is another tip. And I think someone touched on this. Maybe it was you, Cindy. Maybe it was an audience member who chatted with us about it. You really do need to have a roster of your current board members readily at hand in the library. And Cindy mentioned that the same roster of library board members ought to be at City Hall. That document ought to live in both places because the mayors and the councils are responsible for the appointing and the approving of people to serve on the board. So make sure that your roster of board members is current and up to date. And then it's perfectly cool and altogether a really good idea to develop an interest list of people that you think would make really fine board members when those vacancies need to be filled. If you have a wish list of potential trustees, when those vacancies come up, you're ahead of the game. And you can share those numbers or those names with your mayor's office. Now, again, it's the mayor's, within the mayor's authority and the council's authority to make those appointments. So they can look at your list and they can say, thanks for this, but we have our own people in mind. That doesn't happen very often. In my experience, mayors and councils are totally happy to take the recommendations from the library board, knowing, as you do already know what it takes to be a really wonderful member of the library board. You know what it takes, and you know the people in your friends and family circles that would make really good additions to your board. Mayors and councils are happy to hear about that. It helps them make these appointments, so they're usually really quite thankful for the help. This I wanted to show you because I stumbled upon this from the Lansing, Kansas Library Board. This is a really neat idea and can really help in those recruitment efforts as well, as a way to kind of refresh your memory about when people's terms are due to expire. It's one thing to have a current roster of board members, to have their names and email addresses on file and their contact information. It's another thing to know when they were appointed and when their term is due to expire. Lansing Library Board in Kansas puts this information front and center on the page that speaks to their library board. I think this is a classic idea, and I rarely, if ever, have I stumbled upon this before. So if you like this idea, it's a simple addition. All of you who said earlier this evening that you have the list of board members on your website, it's a simple addition to include the length of term. This is another recruitment idea that I'm anxious to see more libraries grab hold of, and this is an online board application that can go up on a city's website. In this case, this board application for board service on any Sioux City board or commission, the library included, is on the City of Sioux City website. So if people were browsing the city's website looking for a volunteer opportunity, they would see opportunities at the museum, at the Arts Center, at the Lewis and Clark Center, and at the public library. So this, having an online interest form or an application, makes this recruitment process very transparent. This takes you well outside your circle of family and friends. Those are the people, of course, you would turn to first in your conversations and in your thought process. But having an application, either in paper or online, makes this opportunity to serve on the board much more transparent, much more well-known. That's Sioux City. Cedar Falls does the same thing. And here you can see a little bit more details about what the library board, the work that they'll be engaged in, shows up also on the City of Cedar Falls website. So when we talked earlier about adding a couple of paragraphs to your website, in addition to the names of the trustees, adding a couple of paragraphs about the work of the library board, that's wonderful to have it on the library's website. It's even cooler if all of that shows up on the city's website as well. So ask if these things can be in both places. And my last tip, I think, for you before we bring forward one more opinion poll for you. This is my last tip, and you're going to see this one come back a time or two throughout the Boardroom series, because this visual I use a lot. I use this visual for many aspects of board education, but tonight the idea is a recruitment tip. If you bring a calendar to this process, I think you will find that your ability to fill those vacancies will be a smoother process. In my experience, a very common reason why recruitment and filling those vacancies is too rushed is that the boards don't start this conversation early enough in the calendar year. Your terms, any library board member's term in Iowa, starts in July and concludes in June. And typically these are 6-year terms. That's another thing you should be kind of upfront about. We never talked about that yet tonight, so we'll throw this in at the end. Typically they're 6-year terms, but again, turn back to your library ordinance to see the length of terms that have been specified for your library board. You'll find it there. At any rate, when the terms start in July and conclude in June after 3, 4, 5, 6 years, whatever, what I find is that boards don't begin to think about filling those vacancies until like May or June, and that's way too late in the calendar year. If you bring a board business calendar to the process, and if in January or February you look ahead to June to see whose terms are about to expire, then you can start having those conversations much earlier in the process. You can ask the person whose term is due to expire in June. You can say, "Hey, Joe, what do you think? Your term is going to be up in June. Did you know that?" And he'll say, "No, I don't think I knew that. Yay." Or Joe will say, "No, I want to stay. I would be happy to re-enlist for another 6-year term." It's important to ask Joe that question, because if he has had enough, he should be able to say so without feeling railroaded into taking on another term. And I think where people feel pressured to say yes to another term is when you don't bring this to your board agenda until May or June. Then it's crunch time and you have to figure this out. But if you start this in January or February, it gives you ample time to turn to your list of prospective people. Contact those people ahead of time. Suggest that they come and sit in on a spring board meeting, and then you'll just have much more time. The process is not so rushed, and people don't feel pressured into staying longer than they want to. Does that make sense? If you like that idea, you'll see a board business calendar come back a time or two in our upcoming installments, because there's lots of ways that you can apply a board business calendar to your agendas from month to month. All right, we are closing in on the final few slides here, so I think Cindy has the final question for you that I'll bring forward.
Okay, so what will be your library's new sales pitch? And obviously from these puzzle pieces, it's communicating effectively. If you think about all the things that we've talked about tonight, do you think your recruitment conversation, your whole process, does that need to change? Again, think about what we've talked about. It's a heightened or elevated level of volunteerism, those great expectations of what you have, the responsibilities of a board member. What attributes are you looking for? If you look at your survey here, which of these suggestions will improve board member recruitment at your library? Check all that apply. So take a look at those.
It looks like developing a brochure. I'm digging that. Maintaining the list of trustees, the roster of people and their term expiration. You know, it seems like a simple thing, but I can't tell you the number of times that I have heard that I just bump into that When I do board training, and I do a lot of it, as do my colleagues in all the other districts, we're happy to drive around the countryside and do in-person even board programs right at your library. We do that a great deal. And this does come up a lot where people just don't know when they were first appointed and when their term expires, so that's a good start.
And Bonnie, I think at City Hall here in Spirit Lake, it has the board member and it has the year they began, I think, which is nice.
Yeah, that is nice. I think it's wonderful if you can find both of those dates. A lot of times people who have been really long serving trustees, they've long ago forgotten when they when they were first appointed, and it's a question that I often lead off with when I'm doing any kind of board programming at an individual library. I often will lead off with that question, going around the table and asking when they started. And a lot of people just don't think, oh, I don't know, it's been a long time. 10 years? No. 15? They just kind of, time flies, right? We are just about out of time. So we will wrap it up by saying that recruitment starts by first having a really good understanding of the roles and responsibilities of the library board, including that board education standard. And then, that's the first part, and the second part then is being able to fairly and honestly communicate those roles and responsibilities of the library board, to really fairly communicate that to prospective people who are expressing interest in joining the board when there are vacancies to be filled. And that communication can happen in various ways, as we've touched on tonight. It can happen through flyers or brochures that summarize board service. It can happen by developing some application forms that you can give people in paper or produce as an online form on your library's website, and it can certainly happen in your conversations with people who express interest in library board service. Any other ideas or commentary? I don't think we missed any questions or comments that went flying through the chat space.
Bonnie, we had a couple people in chat. I said something about making sure you keep track of your attendance tonight for CE certification. Can you talk a little bit more about that yet?
Yes, for sure. For those of you who are library trustees in the audience, you really don't need to accumulate attendance certificates in the way that your directors do. You can. I mean, if you like certificates, your directors will be happy, I'm sure, to share their certificate with you. But what I recommend for library boards is that if you just reflect in your minutes from month to month what each of you have done, and remember this, the board education standard calls for each person on the library board. This is each individual on the library board participates in continuing education. So if you don't have your entire board listening in tonight, that's okay. In your minutes, though, reflect who was here. Reflect by name the people who were here and who listened in, and then you will know from month to month who has fulfilled that standard and who maybe still needs to do
Bonnie,
a little something to meet that standard. But my other piece of advice has been, since that standard was revised, is to add a line to your library board agenda from month to month. Add a line on your agenda that says Board Education Report. You might not have something to report each and every time, but in those months that you do, it leads you to that conversation, and it leads you to being able to just reflect in your minutes what it is that your various trustees have done. So record it in your minutes and you're golden. Does that help? Thank you ever so much to all of you who joined us tonight for spending your evening this way. We hope you took away some some good tips and strategies for your board recruitment efforts. And my thanks, of course, to Cindy Davis, Director at the Spirit Lake Public Library, for joining us tonight as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. It's been a good evening.